High in the Indian Himalayas, more than 16,000 feet above sea level, there is a small glacial lake that locals once refused to approach. It is quiet, remote, frozen for most of the year. But when the ice melts, the water reveals something deeply disturbing. Human skeletons, hundreds of them, skulls, ribs, femurs, entire human remains scattered around the shoreline and beneath the shallow water. For decades, no one knew who these people were, where they came from, or how they died. The place eventually became known by a chilling nickname, Skeleton Lake. And the mystery behind it is still not fully solved. The lake's real name is Roopkund. It sits high in the Himalayas in the Indian state of Uttarakhand, surrounded by jagged peaks and glaciers. Reaching it is not easy. Even today, modern trekkers must travel for days through steep terrain, high mountain passes, and dangerous weather to reach the lake. The altitude alone is punishing. At over 16,000 feet, the air holds barely half the oxygen found at sea level. Storms can appear suddenly. Temperatures can drop far below freezing in a matter of hours. It is not a place where large groups of people normally travel, and certainly not a place where hundreds of people should die. Yet that is exactly what happened here. The modern discovery of Skeleton Lake happened during World War II. In 1942, a British forest ranger named H.K. Madhwal was traveling through the mountains when he reached the frozen lake. The ice had partially melted, and beneath the surface he saw something that immediately caught his attention. Human bones, lots of them. At first he thought he was seeing things, but as he looked closer, the truth became impossible to ignore. The lake was filled with skeletons. News of the discovery quickly reached British authorities. Because of the ongoing war, officials feared the worst. Japan had been rapidly expanding across Asia, and British India was on high alert. Some military leaders even wondered whether the skeletons might belong to Japanese soldiers who had attempted a secret invasion through the Himalayas. But that theory collapsed almost immediately. The skeletons were far too old. Many of them had been lying in the mountains for centuries. And the deeper scientists looked, the stranger the mystery became. The bodies were scattered all around the lake. Some lay along the shore, others rested beneath the shallow water. In some cases, bones were still partially connected. In others, they had been scattered by weather and time. Researchers began examining the skeletons more closely, and that's when they noticed something unusual. Many of the skulls had fractures on the top of the head, not on the sides, not on the jaw, not on the back of the skull. The damage was concentrated directly on the crown. The pattern was strange. It didn't look like combat. It didn't look like weapon injuries. It looked like something had struck these people from above. At first, investigators suspected violence, perhaps a massacre. Maybe bandits had attacked a caravan traveling through the mountains. But the bones told a different story. There were no signs of swords, arrows, or spear wounds, no defensive injuries on the arms, no damage that would suggest a fight. Instead, the skull fractures were remarkably similar across many victims. Rounded depressions, blunt force trauma, directly from overhead, as if something had fallen from the sky. That detail would eventually become one of the most important clues in the entire mystery. But before scientists could explain the cause of death, they had to answer another question. Who were these people? Clothing fragments provided the first hints. Some skeletons were found with leather sandals. Others had wooden staffs. A few still wore jewelry. These items suggested that the victims were not soldiers. Instead, many researchers began to suspect they were travelers or pilgrims. That theory gained traction because the region around Roopkund has long been part of an ancient religious route. For centuries, people have made difficult journeys through the Himalayas to honor the goddess Nanda Devi. The pilgrimage is known as the Nanda Devi Raj Jat. It is one of the longest and most demanding religious journeys in India. Participants travel through remote mountain paths, glaciers, and dangerous terrain. Even in modern times, with better equipment and planning, the pilgrimage is still extremely risky. In earlier centuries, the journey would have been far more dangerous. Large groups of pilgrims would travel together through the mountains, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, and if something went wrong at high altitude, survival could become impossible. But the pilgrimage theory still left a huge mystery. What could kill so many people at once? For decades, no one could answer that question. Then scientists began applying modern technology to the bones. One of the biggest breakthroughs came with DNA testing. When researchers analyzed the genetic material from the skeletons, they made an astonishing discovery. The dead were not all from the same place. Some skeletons belonged to people with South Asian ancestry, which made sense for travelers in the region. But others had genetic signatures linked to Mediterranean populations. In other words, some of the people who died at Skeleton Lake may have come from areas thousands of miles away, possibly places like Greece or Crete. That finding shocked researchers. How could people from such distant regions end up dying together in a remote Himalayan lake? The DNA results revealed another surprise. The deaths did not all occur at the same time. Some of the skeletons dated back to around the 9th century. Others appeared to be roughly 1,000 years newer. That meant Skeleton Lake was not the result of a single catastrophe. Instead, multiple groups of people had died here over many centuries. But the injuries on the skulls remained strangely consistent. Blunt force trauma from above. Eventually, scientists began to consider a new explanation: a catastrophic hailstorm. High-altitude storms in the Himalayas can be extremely violent. In rare cases, they can produce massive hailstones. Imagine chunks of ice the size of baseballs or even larger. If those hailstones fell from the sky at high speed, they could easily fracture a human skull, especially if the victims had no shelter. And at 16,000 feet in the open mountains, shelter is almost impossible to find. Researchers examined the skull fractures more closely. The shapes of the injuries matched what would be expected from large hail impacts. Rounded depressions, direct downward strikes, very little damage elsewhere on the body. If a group of travelers had been caught in such a storm, the result would have been devastating. People would collapse almost instantly, and if dozens or hundreds of pilgrims were traveling together, the casualties could have been enormous. That explanation seemed to solve the mystery, but Skeleton Lake still raises unsettling questions. Because the lake contains hundreds of skeletons, some estimates suggest between 300 and 600 people may have died in the area. That means multiple groups of travelers likely encountered the same deadly conditions over the centuries. And the lake itself seems to preserve the evidence perfectly. The freezing temperatures slow decomposition. Snow and ice protect the bones from decay. Each summer, when the ice melts, the skeletons appear again around the shoreline. A silent reminder of the disasters that happened here long ago. But perhaps the strangest part of the story is the local legend. For generations, villagers in the region told a story about a king who angered the goddess Nanda Devi. According to the legend, the king was traveling with dancers and musicians during a sacred pilgrimage. The goddess became furious at the disrespect, and in response, she unleashed a storm of iron balls from the sky. The entire royal party was killed. For centuries, the legend sounded like myth. But when scientists examined the skull fractures at Skeleton Lake, the injuries matched something eerily similar. Heavy objects falling from above, striking the victims directly on the head, a deadly storm descending from the sky. In a strange way, the ancient legend may have preserved a distant memory of the real disaster. Yet even today, not every detail of Skeleton Lake is fully understood. Why were people from such distant regions traveling through the Himalayas? Why did multiple groups die in the same location centuries apart? And why does this small glacial lake seem to collect the dead like a silent trap in the mountains? Standing beside Roopkund today can feel eerie. The lake is calm, the air is thin, the mountains stretch endlessly in every direction. And scattered along the water's edge are the bones of people who once believed they would complete their journey, but never did. Skeleton Lake remains one of the strangest archaeological sites on Earth, a place where history, science, and legend collide. A lake where the dead still lie beneath the ice, waiting for the mountains to reveal their story again.